Hello and welcome to this niche conversation. I'm here with Sandra Harrison, and Sandra and I over the years have made a number of training videos, and we made a series recently which you can also catch on YouTube, and so she suggested that we do this live stream. So it's a bit outside my comfort zone but very exciting. So thank you for that suggestion. I'm really pleased to be here.
You're welcome. It's a shame we are here having to carry on these conversations, but we are. Why are we still having to talk about racism?
Well, as we know, racism and xenophobia are very much on the rise. And it's really important, I think it's really important that more people feel more comfortable about having conversations rather than a kind of silence, often because people are a bit scared to say anything, so that we can create a space where people can everybody can thrive. You know, this isn't about anything other than creating spaces where everybody can be of their best, give of their best. And in the chaos that's going on in this world at the moment, we need all the skills, abilities and talents that we can get to make sure we create that space that's good for all of us.
So you mentioned a safe space, which implies people would be pretty scared to talk about these things. Why are people scared to talk or challenge racism?
People have said different things. Sometimes it's about being scared to say anything because they're not sure what to say. Sometimes they're not sure what the reaction might be. Sometimes they believe some of the things that they've heard, but you know, we know people aren't born racist. We learn it from the way we get information round about us in all sorts of different ways. And therefore, you know, it's not surprising many people think what they think when you consider how they learn what they know. We don't grow up neutral. You know, it's the way we learn history, it's the way we see things in the media, who makes the decisions about what's shown and what's not shown. Those kinds of things influence how we see others, how others see us, how we think others see us. All of that is influenced by the way we get information.
You often refer to that as the lens through which we see the world, don't we?
Yes, yes.
And the influences that go into that. You mentioned the media, and obviously there's a lot of talk about asylum seekers at the moment. Some nasty things being said about all asylum seekers, legal and illegal. They seem to have been grouped. What's the thought process behind that, do you think?
Well, we know what the thought process is. It's about maintaining division, and it's about scapegoating vulnerable people for some of the wider ills in society, blaming them for everything, encouraging people, often people who are themselves vulnerable, to blame people on a rung further down the ladder than to look upwards and say, why are things operating in the way they are? Why are the systems operating in the way they are? But yeah, the narrative around asylum seekers has been just shocking, disgusting and untrue. I mean, the reality anyway, as we know, is there's only one race, a human race. There are as many differences in any group as in any other racial group, however you choose to define your group. But it's much easier to see the diversity in your own group than it is to recognise it in other groups. And around asylum seekers, as you said, all asylum seekers and migrants all grouped together, the narrative is often really negative. And yet if we think, you know, people who are asylum seekers are coming from horrendous things happening in their own countries. And the reality is that most asylum seekers will stay in the country next to the one from which they have fled. So to be able to even get to the UK, they must have a lot of resources and resilience to be able to make that journey, because we know there are very few legal routes, and the routes that we know that they're taking are really dangerous and very expensive. So for, when you think about families thinking, well, we need to get to safety, we need to get at least one of us to safety, we can only afford to get one of us to safety, then you can understand why, from a kind of, I don't know if you ever saw the film Sophie's Choice, about the choices, the difficult choices people have to make. Do you send your sons or do you send your daughters? It's really dangerous. You can understand why there are lots of young men, but that has been weaponised, and even some of the suggestions around being sexual predators and all of that kind of stuff. It's really horrific. It's really horrendous. And I'm not saying there aren't, some stories that are true, but that's not the majority in any way. If you think about, for the majority population, we know all sorts of things about people in the majority. So if one person does something that's really horrendous, we think of that in terms of that one person because we've got all of those other stories. Around asylum seekers, who do a range of things, and a lot of people who have settled here and become refugees, skills and abilities they bring are amazing, just as in other groups of people. But the stories we tend to hear are really very negative. So if one person does something horrendous, it just feeds into that bank. It feeds into a stereotype of all the people in that group, rather than just to the people who are involved. And I'm not defending those awful things, but I am saying let's get this in proportion, because what that narrative is doing is creating fear. And an expectation and a justification for treatment that's just inhuman. It's not what we would want for ourselves or people that we love. And
it's another example of the lens, the various factors that influence the lens, creating and weaponising, but basing everything on stereotypes,
absolutely,
as you said, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, we need sometimes to just stop, just pause, just give ourselves a chance to think, to, we hear the terrible stories and we go to fight, flight, freeze brain. And instead of just therefore transferring all those old stories into the new situation, we need to stop and breathe so we can use our thinking brain and remember that there is as many differences, and then kind of check out, so what's the reality of what's going on in front of me right now, as opposed to just going down a stereotypical route.
And you did some wonderful videos earlier in the year about the biases and unconscious biases that lead into stereotypes. I don't know whether we've got enough time to go into that now, if you want to, or we can just go into the next.
Well, what I think is interesting is that still some people talk about their unconscious bias around these issues. Oh, it's just unconscious bias, and that's a bit of an excuse. I'm not saying that unconscious bias doesn't exist around things, it certainly does. But in relation to racism and to some other isms actually, but certainly in relation to racism, when we've had Stephen Lawrence, when we've had George Floyd much more recently, when we have in Scotland, Sheku Bayo, it's not that we haven't had discussions about these kinds of issues. So when people say, I don't know what you're talking about, it's unconscious bias, I'm not so sure. as you know, and we worked with Jane Elliott, and she often used to ask that question, you know, if you're white and you'd like to be thought about, talked about and treated the way people from black and minority ethnic communities are thought about, talked about and treated, and if you would like that for your children and for your grandchildren, then just sort of wave or stand up or whatever. And people don't, and that's because it's not so much unconscious bias, because they know what's going on, they know it's not pleasant, and they know they don't want it for themselves or for those that they love. So it's not so much that it's unconscious bias, it's that difficulty, that tension, because it's cognitive dissonance. It's the psychological discomfort when we know that something's going on, but we're not actually doing enough to kind of challenge it. And yet we still want to think about ourselves as good people and kind of justify the fact that we're not doing anything about it. So whilst we don't want, I never want people to feel guilty about things that happened in the past that have led us to this kind of place where it's easy to adopt them and us or other groups of people. We also have a responsibility to acknowledge all of that in the past and how it still has an impact, and to behave in ways that challenge that in the future so that we can all be treated with respect and dignity. So yeah, we need to create those spaces where it's all right to acknowledge, you know, why you think what you think, but then to realise when you get new information that lets you know very clearly that you only had part of the story, that ignorance is no longer an excuse, even if the only information you have is that you don't have all the information. You know, you then have a responsibility to treat people in different ways. So, you know, kind of as you were saying, why are people scared? You know, they're scared of saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing and being accused of being racist sometimes. And that, you know, can put people into a bit of a eggshell kind of place, a stress place around it. But, you know, it doesn't always have to be confrontational. I don't think, you know, it doesn't have to be. So
you mentioned challenging it there as well and feeling safe enough to challenge it. Have you got any practical ways that people who are either experiencing racism or see others experiencing it, or even just hear people speaking about topical conversations, you know, what are practical ways people can challenge racism?
Well, I suppose responding to those kind of remarks, it's kind of a good thing to kind of practice what you might say, or to at least, you know, think about some of the things that you might say. Although sometimes I know you can be in that kind of place of, what? I'm kind of gobsmacked almost. And quite a good one, I think, is, oh, what makes you think that? Where did you hear that? Sometimes I've said things like, well, I'm not surprised you think that when you think about the way we get lots of information, but really, do you think that's true for everybody? Again, it's just to get other people to think as well, because I really don't think that people get up in the morning and think, you know, I'm going to be racist today. But sometimes we just take on board some of the narratives that are around us and perpetuate that. And, you know, it is easy to scapegoat some people for, and not just asylum seekers, but people from black and minority ethnic communities and people from other less powerful groups, for all the ills in our society. But it's classic kind of power stuff, isn't it? Kind of divide and rule, as I say, blame somebody further down the ladder, then look up to see what's happening further up the ladder in terms of the way the systems are working. This isn't a country that's poor. It's making choices about how we do things. Housing is an issue for people, but it's not that there aren't lots of houses, it's just that there aren't affordable houses. So, we need to think about the stories we get around what's happening and unpack that. Because can we blame that on a few people? No, we can't blame that on a few people. It's not their fault. It is about the way the systems are working, and we need to look at the way the systems are working.
So we can definitely do that as we're fed information. Mm-hmm. If people that are watching this are experiencing forms of racism themselves, have you got any simple steps for them to take? What practical, simple ways, in a nutshell, if we've got a couple of minutes, just to go over those?
I think that's really hard because it's painful. Sometimes people talk about microaggressions, the everyday incidents that remind people that they don't belong. I think they're not micro at all, actually. If someone's blatantly racist, actually you can understand that they are, you can see that they are, you've almost got your armour on to deal with it. But sometimes those kinds of things come from people where you least expect it, and that can really be painful. And it also means that you're kind of a bit wary because you never know when it's going to happen next. So for me, the thing to remember for people who are experiencing racism is that it's rarely about you personally. It feels personal because it's directed at you, but it's not really about you, just you. And so to protect yourself from that point of view. And support networks are worth their weight in gold. I'm often saying that, but they really are. People who can remind you who you really are when sometimes you temporarily forget. And I think it's, racism affects everybody. It's not just white people or people from black and minority ethnic communities separately themselves. We're all part of this culture that get these images that and stories and systems that perpetuate a power relationship. So you learn your place in it. You learn your place in relation to the others, and even where you can accept that there are as many differences in any group as in any other group, and that in challenging that you're behaving in ways that counteract all the stereotypes that are around. That you can still be seen by somebody who doesn't know you as just that stereotype. So there's kind of an armour around that. I think understanding how the system works makes it easier to not take it on board. And it's really important that we don't let it undermine the skills, the talents that people bring. People are our greatest resource, our absolute greatest resource. And we need people to work together to harness all of that for the benefit of all of us.
Super. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether any questions have come through, Gillian. I know we've probably, in the last couple of minutes of this stream. Mm-hmm. Anything else that needs to be covered?
Well, the thing I would say more than anything, I suppose, is that we can make a difference. We don't have to be in a non-racist place, which is perhaps not saying anything, because sometimes our silence can be seen as collusion. It can be seen as agreement. So even though it can sometimes feel a bit outside your comfort zone to say something, find the words that would work for you. Yeah, I can understand why you think that, but I know that's not the case and I disagree. You know, we don't have to humiliate people. We don't need to disrespect ourselves. We can make a difference. And for the sake of us all, we certainly do need to do all we can to make that difference.
Thank you. Would you like to say goodbye to your viewers, Gillian? Because I think
Well, yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. This has been a great opportunity to step into this space to remind us that we can make a difference. We can create a space where we can all thrive. So if you want to continue the conversations, please get in touch, or for training, or to be licensed as a trainer to deliver the kind of training that I deliver, then please get in touch. Look forward to hearing from you. Remember, as I said, you can make a difference.